Hello, and welcome to Color Cues. This series is the latest collaboration from Homepage News, Springboard Futures, and the Inspired Home Show. I'm Tom Mirabile, president of Springboard Futures and consumer trend forecaster for the International Housewares Association. The mission of Color Cues was to bring to the home and housewares industry relevant updates and actionable inspirations on the evolving role of color in our marketplace. So it seemed obvious that the best way to do that would be speaking with the world's leading color trend forecasters and influencers, and to touch on some of the latest market trends, shifts, and opportunities. We're excited to launch the series with probably the queen of color, although I'm sure she's been called that many times, Lee Eiseman, or Lee. Thank you so much for joining us. Lee is executive director of the Pantone Color Institute and also director of the Eiseman Center for Color Information and Training. Thanks for joining us, Lee.
My pleasure, Tom.
So I'm just going to get right into the questions. One of the things that I always wonder about is, has the velocity of color trends changed since you began your career in color?
Oh, there's no question. Absolutely no question. I can remember going into meetings, particularly if there were engineers involved in new product development, and you'd even bring up the subject of color, and they thought it was totally immaterial. It didn't make sense to even talk about the color. It was all about the shape and the design and the texture. And I had a lot of closed arms that I was facing in the very beginning. And over the years, that has so changed in that now you don't have to convince anyone of the importance of color, whether it be product development or brand imaging or any aspect, where you're in the marketplace. Color has to be one of the most important factors, if not the most important.
And has the speed of color trend changed? I mean, do you find that color trends last longer, or since they're so much more influential, have a shorter lifespan than they did, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago?
Well, I think that we can all, well, not all of us, but maybe many of us can remember when there were whole decades that were infused in colors. You know, the obvious one is the avocado of the late 60s and harvest gold. It seemed for years. And then something came in to replace it. But I think in the 80s, we started to see a change in the marketplace, truly in the involvement of color and people understanding it. In the beginning of the 80s, it was all about mauve and turquoise and those colors. And then we moved into the Southwest influence, and we started to see, Miami Vice colors and a broader spectrum. And then in the 90s, there was just far more change that happened rather quickly because so many things were happening in the 90s. You know, in the beginning, there was a recession, and then we went into the dot-com era. Lots of big changes, as there were in the 2000s. So long story short, it's a little of both. They were longer at one point, then they got to be more encapsulated. And now what I think we're seeing in the way of lifespan is that the economy and people's attitudes about what they're buying certainly plays into it. And I think that people are buying today with a little more thoughtful attitude. They want things that are going to last, and yet they still appreciate there's got to be something infused with newness. There's got to be that feeling of something out there that's new and is a refresher. And I think really that's what trends are all about. We're not telling people you've got to get rid of everything you had before. That's silly, especially where the home is concerned. But what we're recommending to them is that you invent on what you have. And here are some great combinations and new ways of looking at color, thinking about them, and ultimately purchasing them.
Yeah, it's fun. It's just amazing to me how many things are affected by color. Even over the last, pharmaceuticals, for example, are branding themselves by color. You know, the little blue pill and all these other things. But that politics, colors have become so political. You know, and it's amazing, but it makes awareness more important, doesn't it? You know, do you find yourself ever working with a client and making them veer away or towards a different color because of the business they're in?
Oh, absolutely. No question of that. I think one of the biggest issues that I have, and I tell it to my students all the time, the biggest issue is to divorce the personal self from the professional self. And even if you're working with the CEO of a company or the marketing manager or whomever, the minute they say, oh, we can't use that color, why? I hate that color. Well, that's a clue that they don't have a clue. It's not about their likes and dislikes. It's about what works for their intended buyer. And that, to me, is part of what my job is when I have to convince someone of a particular palette or what I'm recommending. First thing you have to do is get people on board, to get them to understand that they've got personal likes and dislikes, but that cannot enter into the ultimate decision of what color that widget becomes. That's not an easy thing to do.
No, because you have a lifetime, or whenever you have an association like that, if you hate a color, there's usually a reason. Like, it sticks with you. So let me ask you. Today we're kind of living in I call it an interpandemic period. Nobody's calling it post-pandemic anymore, but in that interpandemic reality, since the pandemic's under control, but not completely under control, especially here in the U.S., consumers aren't feeling completely safe or whole in this sort of now normal. How are people responding to color? What kind of a role is color playing?
Well, I think you have to look at two ends of the spectrum here, if you will. Pardon the pun about color. I think you can't make that one generalized umbrella statement that people are looking for and then give them the answers. I think because people are at different levels of comfort and discomfort. I think that what you're seeing is that some people want what is familiar, what feels safe to them. On the other hand, if you've been encapsulated in an apartment or a home, for as long as people have been, you look around you and you say, I'm so sick of these colors. I need something new and fresh. So I think the answer to your question is there's no one surefire way that we can say, use this palette and this is going to give everybody a level of comfort. I think you've got to find that level of comfort. And it's one of the reasons that as a forecaster, I never, ever make that umbrella statement. What I prefer doing, and what I do for IHA every year, is to show between 7 and 9 palettes, because we've got to acknowledge that one lifestyle and one set of colors does not fit all. People have their own likes and dislikes. And as I said, if they are neutral lovers, and many people are, still they will walk into the living room one day or the kitchen and say, I need something fresh. So, this is old, this is stale. What can I do? And again, this is where forecasting and trends come in. Offer them those opportunities to create something that feels fresh and new, but know that you have to present different lifestyle aspects and different color palettes that will work for those lifestyles. You have to give the consumer today a choice. You cannot force feed them the way we did prior to the 70s and prior to that, where one color palette was the hot thing and everybody ran out and got it because it was a thing to do. Today, they're more thoughtful and they are more aware of what works for me, what suits me, what suits my comfort. And they're looking.
Well, and also when you don't give them a choice, sometimes if you go into some retailers or you see some brands where they're just giving them everything, and it almost looks fearful because they haven't made choices. Right. They've just said, let's throw everything out there and let's see what they like. By the time you figure it out, that's changed because people change. So, but absolutely. So let me add, one of your books, Color for Your Every Mood, explores the importance of color in an environment and how colors create different moods. Do you find yourself turning to that research, more now, when mood management sort of seems to be on everyone's mind, like how I make myself feel, how I make other people feel in my environment?
Absolutely, no question. I think that's just part of the human condition. When you're creating a home, when you're decorating it, you even though you may not be overtly aware of it, or some people are very frightened of it and they turn to professional help, as they should if they need it. But I think ultimately what you have to do is dig into your own soul and lifestyle and choose what feels comfortable to you. And so this is where offering the options comes from. We talked about it as far as trends are concerned, and in the book, I do discuss certain innate feelings that people have about color? Do they want to relate to the outdoors? They want nature to be a part of their interiors? Do they want it to be very quiet and comfortable and soothing? Or do they need that jolt of excitement? Maybe they've got young kids in the family and that's the mood they're going for. So that's where I think you have to show them the options, which I do in that book. Here are options that you can look at. Now let's look at it and think in terms of what is going to suit your comfort level and why. And, you mentioned if too many colors are thrown out there, then people get confused. And there's no question. You throw it all up on the wall and people do get confused.
I think I found the book so fascinating as a second look at it because I haven't looked at it in years, but because I think we've gotten to think of color as such a fashion issue and such a brand identifier that sometimes we forget what color does to people, and it was just wonderful to look at that book. And again, for those of you who didn't hear it, it's Color for Your Every Mood. And it is just, it really looks, it's almost like a psychological analysis. It really speaks to the power of color to enhance or even create emotional, emotions. And right now it's, I can tell you, when I'm home in the same environment, I change color more often now because I'm around it so much, but it's, I love the book. So at this point, it's become clear that the response to the 2022 Color of the Year, Very Perry, has been astounding. So congratulations on that. Many people are predicting a long life for the color, well beyond 2022. Does that surprise you?
No, because history has shown us that there is this holdover effect, I call it. And that, again, goes back to the psychological impact of color. When the consumer becomes more familiar with a color, let's say they've never used anything like a periwinkle blue before, they've never really experienced it, but it's out there, people are talking about it, they're seeing more examples of it. And they want to have a piece of that pie. Maybe I need to bring some of that into the house. It's really kind of a nice color. I want to use it. And once then you build up that familiarization and the fact that you like the color, you've never had it before. Our economy is such, and consumer mentality today, it's far less of a throwaway society. So part of our job is to say you don't have to throw it away. There is a holdover. As you develop this liking for the color and you really have an affinity for it, let's continue to use it. But next year, what can we do that's going to tweak it a little bit? What can we do to change it? What can we do to freshen it up and make it a bit different than it was last year? And I think, again, as colorists, that's our duty, is to be able to freshen up the atmosphere and to show people what other combinations they might be able to use with that color. And it helps them unleash their own creative abilities. When you encourage them to do this, you teach them how to do it. Then they walk into the store, they look online, and they have a whole new attitude. They have more confidence. Oh, okay, I was kind of given permission to do this. So how do I do it next year? And then it becomes fun.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why Color of the Year is so important is, generally speaking, we live color and trend all the time, but sometimes it's easy to forget that the average consumer maybe doesn't have the DNA for that. And this is sort of just that one punch of, look, it really just makes you feel on trend. It becomes a launching off point.
A topic of conversation. And Tom, I have to share with you that one of my most fun stories is that, when we first started out, some people didn't even know the Pantone name. They thought it was an Italian bread or something you used on your And now it's people know exactly what it means. And standing in a checkout line in a market, and there is a woman two ahead of me, and she's talking to the checkout person. And she said, "So, did you hear about the Color of the Year?" This is a few years ago. And the checkout lady said, "Yeah, I love the color. What do you think of it?" And this whole conversation ensued. And I thought, this is a checkout lady, and this is a lady that, lives here. She's not a professional. I recognized who she was. I got home, and my husband said to me, "Guess what question the barber asked me today?" The barber asked me, "What's the color of the year?" And I thought, you know what? Now it's reached a level where there is so much discussion. And that's exactly why we started the Color of the Year at the very beginning, Start a conversation around color. Get people talking about it. That helps to unleash, again, their creative abilities and gets them more interested in the subject. And incrementally over the years, we've seen that build up.
So I think you've answered this question, Lee, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So when, say, a home and housewares product is created in the color of the year, and it's, say kitchen tools or small electrics or appliances, should that item be discontinued when the next color of the year is introduced? Or, if it remains saleable, should we just keep it and sort of do an and or an evolution of that color?
Oh, absolutely, an evolution of the color for the reasons that I've already stated, because once there is a familiarization that builds up and people decide, I really like this color. I'm glad that I bought it. I want more of it, or I want to be able to combine it with some other things that I'm going to be buying in the future. Is it a color that will work with other things? So I don't think, I think the last thing you should ever advise people is, it's so last year, get rid of it. That's such an arrogant stance, and people aren't thinking that way anymore. No, I'm not going to throw things away. I want to hold on to them, particularly if I like them. But again, it's the freshness that we infuse. And that's your challenge as the next year enters into the picture. How do I infuse it with some freshness? What can I recommend to my client, to my customer?
So, there's been such a sort of, I almost want to say, homogenizing of trend that is, patterns, colors, things that we see in, say, bedding. Immediately we start seeing it in other places if it's something that's quickly adopted. Do you think that fashion color trends influence home decor trends in any consistent way? I mean, is it usually runway that influences home trend, or ready to wear, that's more influential, or does color for home and houseware sort of evolve in its own sort of silo?
Well, I think at one point I would have said to you, fashion is definitely the leader, and we always looked at fashion first. But that really has changed considerably. I think the biggest change came in the 90s, when the late 90s, when the realization was that, iMac came out with all those colored computers, that, it can be a computer. Doesn't necessarily have to be from fashion. And that's what captures everybody's attention. So it's not just a fashion thing anymore. It's looking at various aspects of where color direction is going. And when I do forecasting, as I do for Color of the Year, we examine so many different areas: the world of art, the world of entertainment, what's happening in the digital world, in animation, in film. Fashion, of course, we don't underestimate, because fashion designers will often, push the envelope a little faster than other designers will. But still, there are so many aspects of color that you have to look at today that are beyond just looking at fashion as the definitive leader of where color is going.
Yeah, I think, when I see your presentations, I think one of the things that always impresses me is, I always say, this woman is a culture vulture. I mean, it's like, you've got everything in there. You've got, what are the latest museum exhibitions that are showing up in Paris, or, and I think that it's, when, I'm not trying to throw bouquets, but when we say having their finger on the pulse, it seems like for you, it's just a constant, like the eyes never close, and it's what makes those presentations so fascinating. So I can't wait to see the one that you do for us at the IHA next year. So in recent years, we've seen a lot of ready-to-wear colors that were formerly considered feminine sort of cross the gender gap and become massive volume drivers in men's fashion as well, like pinks and lavenders and coral, as you chose a couple of years or so ago. So in your opinion, is color as the way we treat it in home on its way to becoming gender neutral, like in home products like furniture, decorative accessories, rugs, and so on?
Well, I think it depends a lot on the age group that you're looking at. I think that particularly with younger people, or people who are younger minded, so we're not going to put an age on it, but people who don't think in a stultified, stymied way about color. I think that if you talk to grandpa about a pink sofa, he may take a little umbrage at it. But but I think if we're talking to the younger generation today, and we think in terms of pink, and they may even get, a man may get the idea that, oh, when it's pink, it could be a dusty pink. It doesn't have to be a girly pink, so those nuances are they're a little more aware of that. So the answer to your question is that I do think it's getting more gender neutral. And again, historically, there's some proof of that going back to the 90s, when brown was always considered historically a man's color, always a masculine color. Women never used brown, not thinking in terms of the fact that brown is often used in very elegant, when we were wearing furs and now in faux furs and beautiful leathers. Brown was worn by women. They did it, but still it had this onus placed on it. And then along came the movie Chocolat. Chocolate is an aphrodisiac. Martha Stewart was digging in the dirt, but look at how glamorous she made it. It was not just dirt. I mean, we had, and Michael Kors showed this gorgeous sequin dress. I remember going to 7th on 6th. On the runway, nobody wore brown for after 5. Brown diamonds came into fashion.
Right.
So brown lost its onus of being just a masculine color. So sometimes it's just the history of color, where we are at a specific time, that brings us to that. And I think as we go on, it's going to be happening even more. We saw that certainly when we did the blue and the pink several years ago as the colors of the year. So much of our color adaptation and what we feel about color starts in our childhood. And what I say to people, particularly when they do the color word association quiz that I use in my classes, is it relevant today? Because you got sick when you ate that hot pink, that shocking pink cotton candy at the carnival, and you would never touch anything hot pink after that. It's buried in your psyche, so you resist the color. But is it relevant anymore? You're a grown-up now. What effect will that have on your life now? So let's open ourselves to the possibility.
Well, it goes back to the first point that you made, which was, when you're talking to corporations, when you're talking to buyers or any professionals that have to choose colors, eliminating those triggers and acknowledging what they are and putting them on a shelf somewhere is really important. So I think the modern home is sort of, it's a microcosm, okay? And we're spending so much time in the pandemic isn't ending as it should have or as wanted to. So home has become sort of a workplace, a play space, a home base. But in all of those things, it has to now create a unique sense of safety and security. I think that it really hasn't had to have as intensely as it does right now. How can color be used, or how do you see yourself using color to enable that that sort of need for frequent transformation in a home, for all the things that a home needs to be? How do you see color helping us to do that?
Well, I think it allows us to get more creative. I've long been a proponent of using old furniture and repainting it. I mean, that comes from my mother, who painted our upright piano maybe 20 coats of different colors every year. She didn't do spring cleaning. She didn't believe in spring cleaning. She just repainted everything. So I come to it very naturally. But I think it gives us the opportunity to do that refresh and to do it not expensively, certainly to buy new product that we can now use within the home and to make it feel new. And still we are surrounded by that which is familiar, that makes us feel comfortable, that makes us feel safe. But it's part of the human condition too, to want that shiny new lollipop from time to time, just because we need to have that to give us, to uplift our spirits. So I think there's a great opportunity in the home and housewares industry for sales now, just for that reason. You've been living in the same place, you've been experiencing it. Now, what do we do as a refresh? And you offer them the opportunity to buy those refreshes. So it's a great time in the industry, I think, at this particular time, even though we are still mired down with some of the things that weigh heavily on us. That still doesn't get rid of that human impulse to get that shiny new object and to have fun with it.
No, I completely agree. At Springboard, we find ourselves speaking to a lot of clients and saying, you've got to open yourself up to the emotional aspects of a purchase, the intangibles. It's not just about we get you; it's about we are you. You've got to humanize and know that now, probably more than ever in my career, the emotional part of a purchase is very important, and letting people in to make that okay to buy because it makes you feel good. You deserve this, or sometimes it's not all those things. And I think color is one of those things that you see, and it is. Color makes things new. There's so many statistics about new is always better. But color, even if it's color that's been on someone's shelf for a while, it's still new. It may be new to you and new in your home. I think that acknowledging that need for change and that love for new is really important. Okay. Thank you so much for spending so much time today. And to all of you, thank you for spending time with us and with Color Cues. We'll be back with the rest of the series. Lee, thank you for launching this with us. We're really excited about it.
Yeah.
And
yes.
It's just terrific. Thank you so much.